Hey everybody, welcome back. So let's talk about the food shortage possibility and what we're going to do about it. So on the news, you'll see quite a bit of information about what it's going to look like for the next few months. And it definitely looks like we could be in for a bit of a food shortage. I'm not sure what that's going to look like, but I think we can all agree that the shelves are still pretty empty and that food pricing has gone up in general. And if you watch my other video on food shortages, you'll know that a lot of farmers have given up for this year. Well, I can't say a lot, but definitely some have given up on this year. There's evidence of that in Australia, Canada, other places like that. So as that happens, that's definitely going to reduce the amount of food that can go into these supermarkets and that we can then get access to, right? So I think it's not a panic. I'm not overly concerned about it. However, I definitely am planning for the future. And I think we all should have some awareness like that, right? And plan for what we want to do. And so my recommendation is to think about starting some sort of garden. And I'm recommending that for a few different reasons. One, of course, is if we do have a shortage on food, of particular types of food. Now, I think that certain things will not be necessarily hard to find, but will go up in price. So when we think about things like flour, sugar, rice, those sort of things, I believe you'll be able to get, of course, but the price will be higher. And double, triple the price, I would think is reasonable. Other things, however, like fresh fruit and vegetables, I would say could very likely not be available, depending on where you are, what kind of fruits and vegetables are native to your area, and things like that. So that's why a garden is so nice, because not only will you get some of those things, but they'll be fresh, delicious, and really cost effective, right? They just need a little love for a couple months, and you've got some delicious treats. Now, I know a lot of you don't have room, and maybe you're not a gardener by heart, maybe you don't have the time and interest, but it's actually pretty easy. And I'm going to go through in this video some of the ways you can do it really easily and some of the things that I've learned. And I'm no expert, so if you've got ideas, suggestions, please put them in the comments down below. If you like this video also, if you could like it, that would be great. That'll give me an indication of which videos are of interest. And of course, if you want to subscribe, that would be great too, and then you'll get an alert on when new videos come out. So, what to plant? That's probably the first question most gardeners have, is what kind of seeds do I want to buy and what kind of garden do I want? So because I've done a garden probably for the last, I don't know, 10 to 20 years, I'm pretty familiar with that question. And I started off doing a lot of exotic things that I ended up not really enjoying. So the rule number one would be try to grow what you like to eat. And so for me, that's usually things like carrots and tomatoes and stuff like that. It's a bit of a combination for me now, but definitely, what do I like to eat? What do I want to eat? What's going to be better coming from my garden than what I can get in the store? This year I'm doing potatoes. Potatoes take up a lot of room, so I have big containers for those. But potatoes, carrots, tomatoes, beans, peas, those are kind of my go-to things that I like to eat, okay? So think about that when you're doing your garden. Think about, of course, what you can do with the space you have, of course, as well, right? That's also going to be a big influence. But the other one that is really a big influencer for me on my garden is what can I actually grow in my climate? So I live in Canada. Canada is not well known for its amazing climate. It's mild, I would say. It's not Arctic, but our summer is relatively short in comparison to some other places. And so we have about 3 months of really nice weather and a whole bunch of other months of not so good weather and mediocre weather. So cold, wet, and that sort of stuff. So I need plants that will mature fast. So when I buy seeds, I always look for the quick mature seeds. I used to buy the fancy seeds, what are they called now? Heritage or Heirloom seeds with the really cool looking tomatoes and stuff like that. I got almost nothing year after year. So I gave that up. I buy the hybrids now that will mature very quickly, whatever matures the quickest. So I look at how many days until I get a yield. and that's what I buy. So ideally, I'm looking for less than 60 days because my summer is so short. There's nothing like having a tomato plant that is just getting tomatoes on it, and the tomatoes are still green, and then the cold weather comes in. So I've had that so many times that I just, yeah. So I look for shortest days for my climate. If you're in California or a warmer climate, then this is probably not such a big concern for you. There may be other concerns like that that you have, but that's not one of them. So think about that. And then when you're choosing what you want to grow, think about what are you going to do with it as well, right? So for me, I love tomatoes because I could do so many things with those. I can cut them up with some mozzarella. Whew, just thinking about it makes me hungry. I can make it into pasta sauce. I can just eat them like they are with a little salt. And there's just so many things you could do with tomatoes, right? I could dry them out. I could just, it's just great in stews. Same with carrots. I love carrots in stews. So for me, that's great. But, I want to think about when I have those sort of vegetables, how am I going to store them? So with carrots or potatoes, those sort of root vegetables, I can just keep them in the dirt that they're actually in the ground for quite a while into the winter. If I want to move them into, say, my garage or something, I can put them in a container, throw some dirt in there with them, and just put it into my garage where it's nice and dry, and I don't have to go out into the snow or the rain to get a carrot. So I can do that. So they keep really well. Probably one of the best things for just being able to keep it long. Tomatoes, not so much, right? So very short shelf life for those. So what I will do if I want to keep those for a long time is bring them in, make them into sauce, freeze it, or put it in the fridge, tell them to use it, and that works, right? They keep much longer in the freezer than they would just on the shelf. So think about that transition because you're not going to necessarily eat it all at once. That's really the idea with the garden is you're going to have a little bit of a stockpile, hopefully, that can get you through. And so think about that. If you have to eat it all or maybe give it away or trade, I've done a lot of trades this week with food, and it's been great. It's been fantastic. I haven't gone to the grocery store in ages, and I've just been having a great time that way. So those are 3 things to think about when you're figuring out what to plant. Now, a lot of you probably live in apartments or condos or maybe just small houses with not a lot of property. And I get it. I've been there. I'm fortunate enough to have a little garden outside, but it's not a very big space, right? So I'm always thinking about what am I going to use as a container? So I've got some raised beds, which are really nice if you can do that. If you've got the space to do it, and it doesn't take a whole lot to do. You can actually buy them on Amazon, some ready-made plastic ones, or you can get some wood and make some yourself. The benefit of raised beds is that it allows you to, it's more comfortable for you as a gardener because it raises it up a little bit, which is nice. But if you can't do a raised bed, then maybe you have to improvise a little bit. So I recently bought some plastic tubs that I have, and I drilled holes in them, and those are going to be for my potatoes because those will hold like 10 gallons at least of dirt. So that's pretty good. The other trick that I've seen quite often is buying 5-gallon buckets and just drilling holes in the bottom of them. And that works great as well. I mean, it's not huge, but if you're looking at something like a deep root vegetable, like a carrot or a beet or a radish, or anything like that that's got deep roots, then a 5-gallon bucket's pretty good. And even if you don't fill it all the way, it's going to have that kind of, it's going to have the support for the vegetable as it grows out of that bucket. So not a bad idea. They're really cheap. It's just a few dollars, right? One of the things you want to make sure if you're using a plastic container like that, then make sure you drill holes in the bottom of it so it has proper drainage. Otherwise, your stuff's just going to rot, and that's not going to be fun at all. If you want to go a little smaller than that and don't want to spend any money, then take a look at things in your fridge, the containers that are in your fridge. For example, maybe the 2-liter milk carton that's in your fridge. That'll work, right? If you're growing herbs or even small tomato plants or smaller plants like that, that'll totally work. You can throw it on your deck. Yeah, it doesn't look awesome. So depending on where you live, if that's not going to blend in very well, then maybe you want to go out and buy a fancy pot or something like that to put it in. But it's an idea, right? Garbage cans, plastic garbage cans especially, you could do that. One of the things you want to watch out for with the plastics is, I don't know how much this matters, but I prefer to buy food grade plastics. So on the 5-gallon bucket, I'll make sure it's food grade that restaurants could use before I put my potato seeds in there. or plantlings in there. And so that's just something to think about. I don't know how bad of a problem that is as far as the plastic leaching and things like that, but I lean towards on the side of safety, just to be careful that way. So something to think about. Let's see, plastic milk cartons, we talked about that. All right, so those are some of the containers you could use for outside. I've seen people actually even take rubber tires and stack them up and then fill that with dirt to make a container for their garden. Now that looks, it's not super appealing to look at unless you're, into automotive stuff. But, even in my neighborhood, which is not the most fancy neighborhood, that probably wouldn't go over very well. So, but, it's tough times, so we use whatever we can. All right, so we've gone through what we want to plant, how to figure that out, what kind of containers we could use. Now, where are you going to put your garden? So as I mentioned, I have a bit of a backyard there where I've got a room for, a couple of little raised beds, a couple of containers with my potatoes in them, a couple tomato plants, which is good. But maybe, if you have that space, that's great. If you've got more space, I would do it totally different. If I had more space, I would do rows of gardens, or like rows of potatoes and rows of carrots, and I would have that kind of organizational row type of thing going on. I don't, so I'm not doing that. But I've seen it, and I love that, right? You wouldn't even need necessarily raised beds. You just make lines in the ground, put down some fertilizer, plant your stuff, and Bob's your uncle. So that'd be great. You'd get quite a bit of food doing it that way, I think. I'd have squashes, cucumbers, things that sprawl and take up a lot of room. That's probably what I would do there. Squashes are great if you can do that. Not everybody likes squash, but if you want to make like butternut squash soup or something in the wintertime, whoo, man, that's nice. Put in some spices in there. The great thing about them, though, is that they're really big. So it will make a lot of food. So for a vegetable, if you think about it, like a tomato doesn't go very far. But a big squash, you can do a lot of things with that. And it's actually a lot of food. So that's something to do if you can grow it in your area. But back to where are you going to plant? So your backyard, definitely my first choice would be my backyard. I've got a little deck that I can put containers on, full sun, so great for tomatoes and those sort of plants that like full sun. Not all of them do, like my peas and beans, they don't care if they don't get full sun. So I put those underneath the deck, and that works out pretty well. How about maybe a communal garden? So if you're living in the city, there's a lot of communal gardens that you can become a member at, and you can have a little area where you can grow some stuff, and it works out pretty well. Those are pretty cool. I walk by those quite often, and I'm always impressed with how nice they look. So that might be an option for you. Other options might be your balcony. So when I lived in an apartment, my balcony had my tomato plants on it, and it worked great because they got a lot of sun. They like a lot of sun. So I would recommend that. So if you've got a balcony that'll work for that, go for that. If you live in the country, you could technically just plant stuff in the forest, right, in kind of public land. Now, I don't know, you have to check the laws in your area and just be careful doing that, because they say you could do it, but I don't know anything about your area. I don't know how strict it is. So take a look at that. I'm not recommending you break any laws or anything like that, but it's quite possible that could be trying to do whatever you want in that regard. I mean, this is a few years ago, so things are a little more strict now, but back then that was totally fine. So that's what we did, and that was fine. Animals will tend to eat the stuff, though, if you don't put some fencing around it. So we had to do that a little bit. But there's other places you can grow stuff that you wouldn't necessarily think about. And for example, what about in your darkest closet or your dark garage, right? What's going to grow in there? Well, funny enough, I just saw the other day somebody was growing mushrooms, and it's actually not that hard to do. I thought it was almost impossible to do that. But if you get the right information, the right seeds, the right setup, you can grow mushrooms in a relatively kind of dark area. And this person was using an old aquarium to grow them in. No dirt. They were just in these kind of rolled mat type things. And it was amazing. Tons of mushrooms. So if you like mushrooms, I'd recommend looking into that, because that might be something you can do inside rather than outside. Save you some space there. So that was cool. And when you're planting your seeds, one of the things that I do, I live in a colder climate, so for me, it works out, is I start to grow them inside in very small egg containers. So I take those plastic, or they're kind of like a papery egg container, and I put dirt in those. It's just a little tiny area for the seed, but it gets them started, and it allows me to have a big tray full of seeds going. And then once they've sprouted, once it's warmed up a little bit outside, which is about now, that's usually what happens to me this time of year. So that is what I would recommend. And I'd recommend you get started with a garden. Maybe you're just going to do herbs this year, which is totally fine. Get some basil going. Oh man, that tastes good in like a pasta or something. Maybe some oregano, maybe some thyme, maybe some rosemary. Oh man, those are all delicious, right? And that will kind of get you started in this whole garden thing and maybe get you hooked on growing stuff. It's super rewarding when you do grow something. Even a carrot, when you pull a fresh carrot out of the ground, it tastes totally different than any supermarket carrot you're ever going to buy. And you take pride in actually growing something like that, right? And unfortunately, with a small garden, it doesn't go a long ways as far as food supply. So you're not going to be able to feed yourself throughout the winter on a small garden. However, it will complement some of the other food that you get from other sources. So is it going to solve the problem of a large food shortage? Probably not. Is it going to put you in a better situation? For sure. Is it going to allow you to learn new things and have a good time, perhaps with your family or friends doing this? For sure, right? So definitely worth investigating. And I would say it's worthwhile for anyone to take a look at, and hopefully that will help you in the months to come. So that's it for today. I hope you enjoy planting those, whatever they are you're planting. And if you're interested, I'll show you what I'm growing and how it's going to work out. They've just started, so I'm pretty excited about that. But if you've got any comments on what you're growing in your area, how that's working out, please put it in the comments below. I'd really be excited to see that, especially if you're able to grow a large quantity of stuff that's really going to help people in the next year. That would be really interesting to hear about. So that's it. Thanks a lot. Safe travels.